Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for this breakout session, John Lyon.
Everything okay?
Oh, sorry, that was John's speaker. John Lyon is currently the chairman of the board of directors for First Florida Credit Union, who is our business, our sponsor and our partner for this event. He is also a professor of business for FSCJ and has been since 1982. He teaches finance, insurance, and operations and has a 44-year career in the property and casualty insurance business. So without further ado, I will pass it along to John.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that nice introduction. This is your business with proper cyber liability coverage. And what we're going to be talking about today is cyber liability, what's included in it. And our agenda for today is, what is cyber liability? Understanding what's included in most cyber liability policies. How does your cyber liability policy respond to the risk in accepting credit cards? We're going to talk about cyber attacks, data loss in the business income form, as well as security and privacy liability, what's covered there, questions that management should ask, and we will finish up talking about some of the most common types of cyber attacks. What is cyber liability? This is a heat map, and this shows you the 6 tiers of a cyber security threat to most businesses. At tier 1, and it's a heat map because if you look at the right side of the pyramid, you'll see the green going to red, then going to orange. It shows as it gets hotter how intense the loss would be. At the very bottom tier, it's the target of cyber attacks is to web pages and individuals, and it's more of a nuisance. Tier 2 is going after small businesses, and we'll talk about a little bit more about this in just a moment. But the impact is normally for denial of service or breach of their information, something called personally identifiable information. And here again, we'll come to a little more of that in just a moment. Tier 3 is after executives and mid-sized businesses and going after personal data theft and their operating systems. Tier 4 is looking at enterprise systems. That's the actual system that runs most business, the point of sale system of businesses. And we'll talk about some cyber attacks where thieves have gotten into the point of sale system, and they're looking for identity theft. And the impact is financial gain. And tier 5 is going after technology, global 2000 entities, critical infrastructure. And this is for economic and technological advantage. And tier 6 is going after technology, critical systems, people with knowledge. That's the severe loss, compromised technology. What is cyber liability? What does it cost for a data breach? The Ponon Institute does an annual study, and in their 14th annual study, cost of a data breach, which took all of the 2020 numbers, the average cost of a data breach is $3.86 million. And that's up 12% from 2014. It's approximately $150 per lost or stolen record. The average data breach compromises about 25,575 records. And here's some 2020 facts about data breach and cyber liability. The United States still has the highest cost of a data breach of any country in the world. Healthcare has the highest industry cost of a breach. 280 days. Think about this, 280 days, the better part of a year, is the average time to identify and contain a cyber attack or a breach. 52% of breaches are caused by a malicious attack. 80% of breaches contain customer personally identifiable information, PII, and we'll talk about this all through today's presentation because that's what most of the cyber thieves are looking for. And cyber attacks have grown and continue to grow in sophistication. There's a lot of state-sponsored bad actors. Russia, North Korea, Iran use cyber attacks as a way of funding their operation. These attacks are now happening in larger frequency. Large, medium, and small businesses are equally being attacked. There's increased financial impact to the businesses and their customers from the different cyber attacks and the information that's compromised. And I would ask everybody in the class today attending, who's had their credit card hacked or private information assessed? The 4 high levels components of a data breach is detection and escalation is the first one. This is the activities within a company to reasonably detect the breach and then escalate once the breach has been detected to those in the company that are appropriate personnel to go ahead and take action and do this within a very quick time period. The second high-level component is the notification. And this is the activities that enable the company to notify data subjects with a letter, outbound call, email, or other general notice that their personally identifiable information was lost or stolen. It includes the cost related to communication with data protection regulators and other parties. And think about it, we'll talk about this. What are the state of Florida's laws and requirements in the event of a data breach? And then your ex post response, all the response activities after the breach to help victims of a breach communicate with the company, to ask additional questions, obtain recommendations in order to minimize the potential harm to them from the information being released. The redress activities also include in the response such as credit monitoring, credit report monitoring, reissuing new credit cards and account numbers. And then the lost business costs. This is the activities that minimize the abnormal loss of customers as a result of the data breach. This is called churn. We'll come to that later. In addition, the increased cost of new customer acquisition following disclosure of a data breach. Once a data breach has been disclosed to the public, a lot of people will discontinue doing business with the company in fear that their information could get hacked. Here's some of the worst cyber attacks of 2020, and I'm only going to hit a few, and I'm doing that just to prove a point. On August 20th, 2020, researchers at Comparitech uncovered an unsecured database with 235 million Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube users' profiles exposed online, and it was belonging to a defunct social media data broker, Deep Social. And they were able to go in and scrape out leaked information, including names, ages, genders, profile photos, account descriptions, statistics about followers, engagements, demographic numbers such as likes, followers. All of this information they were able to grab. October 16th, 2020, a year long, and I wanted you to pay attention to this. This was a year-long point of sale system breach at a barbecue chain restaurant called Dickey's. And the point of sale is where the employee would ring in your order and then take and swipe your credit card for payment. And the hackers posted over 3 million customers' payment card details on the dark web, where each one of those records were being sold for $17 per card. On December 8th, 2020, one of the world's largest security firms, FireEye, had a hack where unauthorized third-party actor accessed their network and stole the company's hacking software tools. The highly sophisticated actor also attempted to search and gather information related to the company's government customers and how to get into their websites. Some of the attacks in 2021 so far. The Chinese social media company SocialArc suffered a data leak through an unsecured database that exposed accounts details and that personally identifiable information we talked about of 214 million social media users, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. And this exposed information on each platform varies, but include users' name, phone numbers, email address, profile links, all this personal information. And then on April 6, 2021, 500 million LinkedIn users' profiles were discovered on the dark web, and the hackers shared 2 million of these LinkedIn records for only $2 to prove the legitimacy of the information so they could sell the rest of the information. 5 data breach statistics and trends to look out for in 2021. Has more remote work because of COVID-19 and it's expected to increase, data breach costs and incident response times have gone up. It would increase the time to identify and contain a potential data breach. So now with more people working from home, and a lot of people probably will never go back, that'll be a change, never go back into the office, there's more security threat and risk of data breach and being able to identify. We talked about this when we did the heat map, but small businesses are increasingly at risk too in 2021. If you work for a small or mid-sized firm, it used to be thought that these people flew below the radar and were not noticed by the bad actors. Over the past 3 years, we've seen the number of small and mid-sized businesses that have suffered a cyber attack grow exponentially. And cyber criminals are targeting humans as much as technology. Cyber criminals are often stereotyped as targeting technology only, but bad actors are hacking human behavior as often as they hack networks and systems, using psychological tricks to scam people out of divulging important information, credentials, financial information, and other sensitive data about their companies. Third-party data breaches were common. Cyber criminals are increasingly targeting third-party vendors, people that work with a lot of other companies. This would be vendors that would manage your point of sale system, that would do other parts of working on your computer system or cyber system. And the vendor breaches allowed criminals to do a couple of things. The bad actors can now access large enterprises through the small one, less secure vendors, because the large companies would have very secure systems, but smaller ones are less secure, so they can go in through the small company and gain access into the large company. And stolen or compromised credentials were the most expensive cost of malicious data breaches. Malicious attacks registered as the most frequent root cause, 52% of breaches, versus human error that was 23%, or system glitches, 25%. But at an average total cost now of $4.27 million. What is cyber liability? In November of 2019, I just wanted you to see this, 5 million cards, credit cards that were stolen was sold on the infamous Joker's Stash card bazaar on the dark web. Joker's Stash offers a 2-for-1 guarantee on stolen cards. If they buy the stolen card and the card has been turned off before the hacker gets to use it, they get 2 more card numbers for free. And most card breaches at restaurants and other brick and mortar stores occur when cyber criminals manage to remotely install malicious software on their retailer's credit card processing system or the point of sale system. And it's often by compromising third-party firms that help manage these systems for the restaurants or brick and mortar stores. I just want to quickly review this. If any of you have gotten your credit cards and you see they put a new chip on there, the chip on the credit card is called EMV, and that stands for EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa. And that's the current standard for hundreds of millions of smart cards around the world. And it's thought that these microprocessors embedded in the credit card rather than a magnetic strip on the back makes the card much harder to clone or steal the information than a magnetic strip. And I just want to point this out. Merchants that were not EMV compliant, meaning that you slide your credit card so they can get the magnetic strip on the back, those merchants are subject to higher fines, penalties, and more at risk for the credit card hack. What's included in most cyber liabilities? The main thing of what we're going to be talking about today. Notification cost and forensics. Most policies cover, number one, privacy breach and response services for a computer service security expert to determine the existence and cause of any electronic data breach resulting in an actual or reasonably suspected theft, loss, or unauthorized disclosure of that personally identifiable non-public information we'll talk about. And so this is to have the expert come in and look through your system and verify the existence or cause of that breach so that it can be patched. Remember, we said in one of the earlier slides, the average time is 280 days for once somebody hacks into your system to discover the hack and then to patch it. The cost of a system, or PCI DSS. PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, forensic investigation to determine the scale of the loss and gather the pertinent data of those lost records. The cost of an outside counsel, such as a cyber attorney, to consult in regards to the notification laws pertaining to each state. I've got a link here, but we'll come back and specifically talk about what the state of Florida requires. The postal expenditures in providing notification to those who are affected by the breach or the hack. And payment, usually up to $25,000 for a computer security expert to demonstrate your business's ability to prevent a future electronic data breach as required by usually those merchant service agreements that people sign to be able to accept credit cards, the PCI DSS standards. And without this last one, without that computer security expert to be able to prove that your system's been patched, there's a lot of these credit card processors that won't allow you to accept their cards. Typical notification and forensic costs by industry. The average cost of a hack we talked about is $150 per record accessed. But as we talked about in one of the very first slides, is healthcare has the highest cost. For each record accessed and hacked in a healthcare, it's $429. In the retail sector, it's $236. In the finance sector, $210. In transportation, about $129, and in the hospitality area, $119 per record accessed. One truth, the faster the response, the lower the cost. This is why it's so important for businesses to understand what's going on with their systems and to know when they've been hacked. The long tail of a data breach. IBM and the Ponon Institute last year looked at the long tail of a data breach and found that organizations are paying the price for a data breach for years into the future. Usually 67% of the cost of a data breach comes in that first year, but 22% of the cost will show up in the next 12 to 24 months, and 11% of the cost will be in year 3, 2 years later. Here are the direct costs to a business after a cyber attack. And the reason these are called direct costs is these are costs that a business would have to write a check for and pay after a cyber attack. And it's the forensic examination to determine the scope of the attack. The cost notifying affected customers and other parties of the cyber attack and of their information being compromised. Credit or identity monitoring services for those people whose personally identifiable information was obtained. Regulatory penalties or proceedings, the cost of those, the cost of a legal defense, and paying a call center to handle customer questions and information and educational information. And this is usually required 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And then the cost of public relations, of how do you tell the public you've been hacked? How do you minimize the public's fear of coming back and doing business with you in the future? Indirect costs are costs that businesses receive, but they don't necessarily write a check for them. But even though they're not writing that check, these costs are very real to most businesses. Number one is increased customer turnover, and that's called churn, and we will come to that a little bit more later on in the presentation. Increased customer acquisition cost, where increased customer turnover means customers leave and discontinue doing business with you. I think I mentioned this in the first presentation today, that my wife's credit card got hacked at Target. In other words, when Target had their hack, my wife's credit card information was released out to the public. And she was so incensed by that, my wife will not go back and shop at Target anymore. They've lost her as a customer. Increased customer acquisition costs. Now, after that hack has gone public and out into the news, this is the increased cost to convince people to come and do more business with you in the future. The reputation loss to a business after the hack has occurred, the negative publicity, and the diminished goodwill of the business. One more of those indirect costs is the loss of your customers' confidence in your business. Industries with the highest loss of customer confidence, and here again, we called that churn rate. That's equal to the customers that choose to leave the business and not do business with them anymore after a cyber attack. Number one is healthcare. Number two is financial services. And number three is social organizations. Post-breach response, what your customers will want and what you will need to provide to your customers after the breach has occurred. Number one, the cost of credit monitoring service for your customers, and the cost of credit repair services for your customers who have been breached and they've had things go on with their credit, which has now been damaged because of the breach. The cost of identity theft monitoring service that's provided to your customer after that personally identifiable information is released. And the cost of a call center for 24-hour questions of those affected by the breach. They'll need to have educational and loss control information and be able to provide to those people who are affected by the breach. Loss of business income is provided as a loss of net income that the business would have been able to earn had the breach not occurred. And we're going to see later on that on normal business income coverage and insurance policies, it's totally excluded for a hack. So you need to have this cyber liability policy in order to pick up the loss of business income. And then the cost of a crisis management and public relation consultant for your businesses. One note that I tell everybody who I was insuring and doing business with is businesses who are dependent on technology to operate their firms should consider the establishment of an incident response team within the business before an attack occurs. So when that attack does occur, and probably not a matter of if, just a matter of when that attack does occur, you have people in place that know what they need to do and they're ready to act quickly. And a loss, you'll also have to deal with cost involved in claim expenses as a result of civil regulatory action. And this would be the government's taking action against you, or the cost of investigation of a data breach. The cost of regulatory compensatory, and that word compensatory means compensation awards, civil penalties or fines. And some of the regulations businesses have to deal with is HIPAA is a big one, high-tech, Graham, Leach, Bliley, state and federal statutes, government privacy protections, Fair Credit Reporting Act, and the list goes on. There's a lot of government regulation centered around protecting people's personally identifiable information. This came, by the way, this is section 501.171 of the Florida statutes, and it's the requirement for data security in Florida. And I took this right out of the state statute. Requirements for data security, each covered entity, government entity, or third-party agent shall take reasonable measures to protect and secure data in electronic form containing personally identifiable information. A covered entity shall provide notice to the department of any breach of security affecting 500 or more individuals in the state of Florida. So if 500 or more individuals in the state of Florida, you're required to put the state of Florida on notice and let them know that these records have been accessed. And such notice must be provided to the department as expeditiously as practical, but no later than 30 days after the determination of a breach or the reason to believe a breach has occurred. Another large area of concern for our businesses, the cost to avoid the damage, destruction, or denial of service to your network. This is where the hackers come in and they put ransomware in and they ransom your access back to your own network or your management enterprise system that operates your company. Extortion is a method of obtaining financial gain by a cyber criminal. They use methods such as denial of service attacks, where you can't access your records, you can't access any of your network, or they encrypt it in such a way that you have to pay them in order to get your management system back or release of information. We've seen this happen with a lot of large cities. Baltimore had their 911 system locked up where the hackers got into it and turned it off and required the city of Baltimore to pay them in order to get access back to it. They also locked up Baltimore's payment system where people would go in and pay their water bills, property taxes, parking fines, things like that. And the only way they could get it back was to pay the cyber criminals. And think about the reputation or damage to your business that could result. And here again, the loss of customers, canceling or refusing to do business with you in the future, and reduction of your business brand after the hack. Some of the recommendations: when you buy cyber liability, always buy it as a separate policy away from your general liability policy. A lot of companies will include some of this and offer to include it in your general liability policy. I recommend everybody clearly buy a separate cyber liability policy, because one claim could use up your whole general liability limit. An example is if the average cost per record is $150 of a cyber attack, and if your business had 7,500 customers, that at $150, that would go over well over $1 million. And if your business accepts credit cards, you need to have PCI DSS. Here again, at PCI DSS stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Fees Covered. And we'll discuss this more in the next section. Remember, cyber liability policies are issued on what's called a claims-made basis. There are two coverage triggers. Think about squeezing a trigger of a gun that activates a cyber liability policy. The first coverage trigger is that the cyber attack occurred while the policy is in force, and the second coverage trigger is that the claim was reported while the policy is in force. And why that's important, as we saw earlier, that cyber attacks sometimes are 280 days or more. In that one barbecue restaurant, it was a year before it was detected. How does cyber liability response in accepting credit cards? Does your business accept credit cards to conduct business? If so, a cyber breach, you will face Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard fines. And these are fines and penalties that you agree to when you sign the merchant service agreement to accept credit cards. You're putting yourself in agreeing to pay these penalties. And the Payment Card Industry Digital Security Standard Agreement outlines the repercussions in the case that a business is not compliant with their security standards and you're hacked. And their fines are built into that credit card service agreement. And I would argue there's a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses that sign those contracts without thoroughly vetting them, reading them, and understanding them. This coverage is essential for the cost related to the fines and penalties for non-compliance, and for cost for reimbursement, fraud recoveries, and assessments, and the technical complexity of the merchant service agreement or credit card service agreement. Here again, I would warn everybody before you sign one of those agreements, read it, understand what you're agreeing to. This is just something I put in here to show you that you have the card issuing bank, but it goes through a merchant bank or a payment processor back to the merchant. And if you look down at the very bottom, it said recovery amounts can be set at $2.50 per eligible account. And this is a first party assessment. It's not covered by a lot of cyber liability policies. It's something that you can add on usually for an additional premium. You may want to do that. Here's an example. PF Chang had their credit card system hacked and became aware that 60,000 customer credit card numbers got posted online. PF Chang's had a $1.7 million loss as part of the hack. That part of the loss was paid by their insurance company. but they were also assessed and had to pay Bank of America Merchant Services $1.9 million, more than the loss of $1.7 million because of the credit card merchant agreement, PCI DSS fines, and ended up that PF Chang had to pay that out of their own pocket. They paid more of the loss than the insurance company. Be sure if that's important to you, that's added in as part of the policy. This is just quickly, I'm only going to quickly touch on this. The normal business income coverage provided in an insurance policy does not cover a cyber attack. That's why you need the separate cyber liability policy that does provide business income loss. And it says cyber incident is completely excluded under the business income form. The business income form excludes interruption of computer operations. Oops, excuse me. The extra expense form completely excludes business income for a data loss. That's why it's important if you're accepting credit cards and you have a management system that could be hacked, make sure you have the separate cyber liability policy. Security and privacy liability. What is covered in the cyber liability for security and privacy? Costs related to defending a claim regarding a loss of confidential information. So if you're sued over the loss of this confidential information, this company would provide you a defense and pay the ultimate claim. Also, the costs related to failure to prevent the transmission of a computer virus from your network. So how many of us have had one of our friends or relatives or a business where their email system was hacked and they went into the contacts of that business or of a friend and they sent out a mass mailing to everybody in the contacts trying to send out a virus so that if you opened it, the virus would attack your computer. The costs related to the failure to prevent loss of employee information. So if they hacked in and stole your personally identifiable information of employees, and the costs related to the failure to safeguard confidential information stored on your network. And I just wanted to quickly touch on this. The Identity Theft Resource Center is a nonprofit out there that provides a lot of information available to victims and businesses on identity theft. And here again, it's a nonprofit. This information is free and is available to you. Here's some things that I would ask. Have you done a complete review of your cyber risk? And in doing this review, here are questions that I would ask every business person, advise them to ask themselves and ask our IT department. Have you addressed which cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities may impact your operations? Do you have a written policy, procedure, or training program in place regarding safeguarding client information? And this would include employee training protocols, a formal incident response plan, and a formal incident response team. And the reasons this is important, if you were to have the cyber hack, this would allow you to prove that you've done what's reasonable and responsible trying to protect customers and employees' personally identifiable information. Do you have a confidentiality agreement with any third-party service providers, vendors with access to your information technology system? And that could be your point of sale system, your management system, any third-party vendor that's coming in working on any part of your cyber infrastructure. Have you done a confidentiality agreement? Have you vetted those people and looked at how secure they are? And in the event of a breach, whether as a result of a deliberate hack or an inadvertent exposure, what are the potential impacts to your organization? Look at those ahead of time and prepare for them. Has your business ever experienced a cybersecurity incident, whether directly or indirectly, a theft, loss, unauthorized exposure, or use or access to secured customer information? Has it ever been compromised? If so, what steps have you taken to close any gaps in your cybersecurity infrastructure and make sure that can't happen again? Do you maintain any insurance coverage for cybersecurity? And if not, can you afford to pay the $150 cost per client in order to finance a cyber attack on your own? If you can't afford that, you need to buy the insurance. And remember, with some industries, especially like healthcare, much more expensive, much higher amount of limit is needed. Do you use safeguards such as encryption, antivirus, anti-malware programs in your business? What other steps have you taken to protect your network from intrusion, from theft or loss of the information? Do you contact customers via email or other electronic messaging? And if you do you use a secure email or any other procedure to authenticate client instructions that are received via email or electronic messaging to work against the possibility of that client being impersonated and the bad actors trying to give you instructions? What sort of risks do you face today? And we saw that the risks in 2021 are even more enhanced because of all the people working from home. And how do you expect those risks to evolve as your business grows? One fact of life with cybersecurity or cybersecurity coverage, it's not set it and forget it. It's something that you have to constantly review and look over. What is the nature of your business's digital assets that you manage within the company? And where are those assets stored? Who has access to them? Who has and will have access to those assets? Consider not just internal sources, but external vendors as well. Remember, we've talked about how a lot of bad actors are trying to go through third-party vendors who have less cybersecurity into larger companies that have a better cybersecurity ecosystem. Outsourcing the processing of your client credit card transaction does not relieve you of responsibility. If you outsource it, you're still responsible to your customers for their information. Do you vet your vendors carefully? Do you check out your vendors? Do you secure all devices, electronic devices that have access, including smartphones and tablets? Remember, smartphone and tablets don't have the same level of security as desktop and laptop computers. What do we recommend? We recommend that you have a data security risk assessment by an IT professional. And I recommend this for large and small businesses alike who specializes in data security. This assessment should look for the strengths and weaknesses in your handling and your business's handling of data. And the assessment should come with best practices that your company can adopt. And this would show that your business is exercising due diligence. And if you properly documented, and this would save you in court as an affirmative defense when the cyber attack impacts you, your customers, your customers or employees' information. I just wanted to show you this one. I think it's no longer the largest one, but what's one of the larger hacks to date? Equifax in 2017. Equifax maintains data in 800 million consumers worldwide. In 2017, the breach affected 147.9 million Americans, as well as some Canadians and British nationals. And remember, it's about 330 million people in the United States. So this is almost half of every American's information was affected. Hackers are said to have targeted social security numbers and names. The hack was caused by a vulnerable server, and the company failed to patch earlier in the year. And it took Equifax 4 months to disclose the hack. And I just want to quickly show you this, and we're going to move right on. And remember, guys, I will leave about 5 minutes at the end for questions. And February 14th of 2017, Apache, the software provider to Equifax, notified them of the vulnerability. On 3/16, Apache released an upgrade, a patch, if you will, to resolve it. On 3/14, Equifax says they were aware of the vulnerability. On 5/13, the Equifax breach occurred. And on 7/29, Equifax detected the breach. And on 7/30, they patched the vulnerability. This all could have been prevented had they simply executed the patch when they received it from their software vendor. What are some questions that management should ask every time of their ID department? Number one, does your organization have a documented, robust patching practice? Are patches being run and executed right when they come in? Is your organization comprehensive, thorough, and disciplined with respect to the risk and vulnerability assessment, penetration testing of the organization and the mission critical systems and applications of the business? Are you evaluating those? Are you looking at it? Are you seeing where your vulnerabilities are? Does your organization have an effective implemented layers of security controls? What are your levels of security controls? Is your security strong enough to resist a single vulnerability compromising customer information, that personally identifiable information we've talked all through the hour today? Do you have encryption of such sensitive information so as to protect them even if the system is hacked? So if your system is hacked and the bad actors are able to get in, is it protecting that personally identifiable information? Here's some of the most common types of cyber attacks. Number one, the most dangerous is phishing. Phishing refers to criminal activity in which the criminal attempts to obtain sensitive information by masquerading as someone or something else via email. The criminals act as a legitimate person or entity in hopes of you trusting them and giving up your personal information such as credit card numbers, passwords, user's name, credentials, things that they can get that they can then take and access your accounts. An example of these emails would come from your bank, credit union, IRS, or the sheriff's department. Here's a phishing example. This came in through a text. Warning, Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS is filing a lawsuit against you. For more information, call on this number on an urgent basis. Otherwise, your arrest warrant will be forwarded to your local police department and your property, social benefits, bank accounts will be frozen by the government. Just a word, IRS will never contact you via text. Spear phishing is where the email appears to be from an individual or business that you know and trust. Spear phishing targets a specific organization to access confidential information such as financials or trade secrets. Vishing, voice in phishing equals vishing. Vishing can occur via voice email, voice over internet, landline or cell phone, and this is where they call you and ask you either with a recording or with a live person. Make sure you verify who you're speaking with. Never provide any personal or financial information over the phone. Smishing, short message service. And by the way, go down to the bottom. What is short message service? Texting is where they will text you like the IRS text that I just showed you. If you get a mysterious text that contains a hyperlink, don't reply. Mainly they're fraudulent sites. Anything coming from a 5,000 number is usually from one of these type sites. Farming. Farming is using malicious code. Farming directs internet users to a fake website that mimics the appearance of a legitimate website. One, in order to gain a user's personal information, try to get you to log into the fake website so they can gather all your password and your credentials. Farming can redirect you to the fake false website without your knowledge. Everything looks and kind of feels real, and you may never even notice that the web page had changed. Online banking sites and e-commerce organizations have become prime targets. Make sure you see the S in HTTPS or the URL and check your local key or padlock symbol in there. And at this point, I would like to stop and see, Elizabeth, are there any questions in the chat box that we can answer?
I don't see any questions right now, but I will just open it up if anyone would like to put something in the chat box.
And thank you all very much for attending today. And please let us know if you do have any questions. We're happy to answer them.